Hello, everybody out there in TV land. It is Chris from Airwindows. You may be getting a little bit of fan noise. It's letting air circulate there. So maybe we're just going to live with that. Also, my microphone is better than it used to be, so it may be inflicting fan noise upon you. I'm not entirely sure what we're going to be catching up on today. I got about 5 projects surrounding me. And for now, we don't have anybody. Let's see whether it's even. Yep. We are live. We are being recorded. And so far, I've got like 1 person who has showed up. I'm going to do my usual, set the window over to something else, which actually means I can't watch people as they file one by one into the stream, but that's fine. I'll be thinking about, it's a 4, fair enough. Because we're going to spend a couple of hours tinkering around with whatever kinds of things are on the agenda. I'm not sure if you follow my Instagram. If the people who do follow my Instagram saw that I posted something called pin jacks. And the idea behind those is that I'll be able to get this kind of stuff. Printed circuit board material, which I have a lot of, perf board, and design your rack modules. Hey, Bo. It's going okay. I was over visiting my programmer brother, the one who has helped me do a number of VSD making things. He's not doing super well in that he has had a couple of strokes, and everybody in the family or anybody who would be watching this knows that by now. So he is still at home and plugging along pretty well, but it's naturally throwing a scare into him. Honestly, it had me going like, that doesn't seem fair. Why wasn't it me? Surely I'm the one who's supposed to be getting a stroke, the degree to which I hammer away at all this stuff so hard. And that also led to me kind of thinking about stuff. And it didn't lead me to any particularly new conclusions, mind you. But I do think that I'll be doing certain things like making micro modular synthesizers out of electronic parts or whatever, or doing my chill out live stream in such a way that it's designed to not be too big of a strain. Because this is a pretty weird world to be in if you try to do or make stuff, and catching up to that is definitely on the useful side. Like I discovered the other day, actually on the Airwindows website, somebody went to the podcast listing on airwindows.com specifically to complain about my music. And that was adorable. And the interesting thing about it is that it's one of those complaints that was, like, to some extent a relevant observation, but the context was basically all wrong. The fellow's complaint was as follows. He was hang on. Quick question and a quick answer. Does channel 6 and console bus 6 work as an encode-decode pair? No. Channel is not part of console. Channel is a separate thing that just makes sound. You'll be wanting console channel 6 rather than channel all by itself 6 as an encode-decode pair. And one thing that you can do to test that out, if I'm not mistaken, is if you take something like console channel or something like that, and you want to find out whether it's a proper encode-decode pair, what you do is split the audio into two separate things. Like, split it to two buses. And on one of the buses, put the channel encode and the channel decode. On the other bus, put a phase switch, like flip the phase of it. And then sum them together, not using channel because you're using both of the parts of the channel just on one track in series. If you flip the phase of the dry signal so that it's inverted, and then have two pieces of a channel type thing, it should cancel out to nothing. It ideally should be complete and total cancellation and no output. Because for a channel combination to work as designed, it's supposed to put individual tracks back exactly to what they were. And it only takes effect if you're summing together multiple tracks, each of which have had a console channel plugin put on them. So that is sort of your hot tip there as far as encode-decode pairs. And the plugin that is just called channel all by itself is actually a different one. And my apologies for that. They existed long before I did console, and the only relevant way to call the encode for console is to call it the channel plugin, and the decode is the bus plugin. So again, I'm sorry that that is a little bit confusing, but the plugins that were called the channel existed first, and they're not quite the same thing. So yeah, so I've been kind of up against it a little bit because I've been driving out to visit my brother more often than usual, and that's been interesting and weird. Turns out the general stress I'm under is such that I can't like drive predictably. Like I drive okay, but when I drove out to my brother's place, and he moved fairly recently, which is another stress inducer, I guess, I got lost, and I was on 495, and I missed my exit and drove for another half hour before I realized I had gone to the wrong place, and I turned around and I'd added an hour to my trip that way. And then on this last Sunday, when I went down and visited him, I got over there fine, and because I'm trying to travel in such a way as I'm not using my GPS and I'm just paying attention to the road and where I am, which only works when my brain is with it enough that I can actually do that. So I drove over there just fine, and then on the way home I got lost again, and I had another hour to my travel because I was on 495 again, and I keep not remembering that like I'm only on 495 for this tiny little brief time. I always seem to pass the exit that I need because I'm like, okay, here we are on 495, and then I'm going to go to the next thing, which I'll start looking for. So time to start looking for it's already gone by, you know. I gotta tell you, that is weird, and it's a humbling experience to be like, I'm Chris from Airwindows, and I get lost on the highway. It goes mostly straight. Go figure. But so Bo's asking, is there a point in having dynamic varieties of console-type plugin? And I'm not sure how that would work. That sounds a little bit like what Dolby does, or more relevantly, DBX, not Dolby. Dolby does a kind of compression and expansion, but it also does very heavily. It's very frequency related. It's a big treble boost and also a compression. Whereas in theory, it's possible to do that. I'm not sure if I have anything Any ideas that would line up for that? Plus, I'm not sure how useful it would be tonally, because if you did, perfect compression and expansion, you'd be summing in such a way that I guess it could make a kind of sense, because what would be happening is similar to what already happens. Yeah, and DBX is really the one that would be more relevant to that comparison. DBX is much more heavily about dynamics. It's kind of like what console does, because what console does is a transfer function thing, whereas it's doing your different compression and expansion curves, but without any time constants. So it's just reshaping that. I don't think Dolby is necessarily 3-band compressors, but it takes a treble band and makes it quite a bit louder, and pre-emphasizes it and compresses it, and either compresses or distorts it in some kind of interesting way, which is another possibility. So might as well load my poor overloaded brain with the idea of like, oh, a dynamic console? Can we do a, calibrated shift in general level over a time constant, and then undo it also over a time constant? You see, what I think is that will inevitably start getting you departures from what you would have. So maybe the easiest way to try it would be using the power sag circuitry, which is basically just a moving average. So you take a moving average and compress that, and then on the way out you also take the moving average and you expand that and see whether maybe it's the same thing or whether you just threw a bunch of weird distortion and stuff in there. Plug in combining controls and things. Also, let me take a moment and glance at OBS to see whether or not we're rolling off the screen. Nope, that's going to be fine. I have the HF limiter and 2 finals split out. The 2 finals split out is acceleration, so you should look up acceleration for that. Average is a low pass. Average is to roll off, so it's not a acceleration limiter at all. It's going to be the same attenuation no matter what. And slew 2 is some kind of interaction with how that filter works, and I don't have that combining with anything. Although one of the things I was going to start fooling with is biquads. It's a famous basic type of algorithm, and today I thought of a possible way that I can combine that with my ways of doing interleaved things. Like I like doing filters that interleave samples. And the logical thing there would be to take biquads and run them on interleaved samples, so that you're basically doing filters on half sample rate and then sort of doubling them up. But it might be possible, since the biquad is like the samples that you're working on and then the ones bracketing it, to do an interleaved sample and then simply take the ones just out from like the core of it would be interleaved, and then surrounding the core of it would be just the immediate surroundings, just to see how it changed things, just to see what it did. So that might be a thing. So what DBX does is DBX doesn't do the high frequency boost thing that Dolby does, and it applies a much stronger and possibly more time constant associated compression and expansion. So if you listen to stuff or run things through DBX wrongly, like you encode it and don't decode it, or you listen to the raw output, or record stuff raw and then play it on Dolby Decode, what ends up happening is not that dissimilar to like exaggerated remap or running through a lot of console bus plugins all by themselves, in that the compressed version is squished in a not particularly audio useful way, and the expanded version just becomes loud spikes of noise, and it doesn't give it a sound of like, wow, this sounds really audio useful, but it goes into tape and comes out of tape in such a way that it suppresses the noise rather effectively. So let's see, and I'll be looking at transformers. I have continued to fool with transformers from time to time. For instance, the transformer thing that I've got on the kick drum over in the modular thing, where it's sending a control voltage to the transformer and then getting a restricted control voltage. By the way, it'll be neat to see if Whitesea shows up, because if Whitesea shows up, I can ask directly about some of the questions I was asking in an email regarding that Minecraft server idea, because I might start fooling with that. He might or might not be part of that scenario. It's more a question of whether he can find time to do it, which is not necessarily the thing, because that guy, you know, works on YouTube as much as I do, if not more. I think actually kind of more. I might put out stuff more often, but I'm mostly based on the plugins, and he's mostly based on being a YouTube channel. And his production values are a lot bigger. Like the plugin videos that I make aren't that much trouble to put together. They don't take a video editor to do them. So you know, that guy, that's a hard-working dude. So we will find out whether or not the Let's Unwind with Minecraft games thing is going to be a thing. If he's not able to do it, I might just come up with a way of doing it myself. Although I was telling a friend who, rather than being a Discord user, I have this friend who is actually available for fooling around with Minecraft now. This is somebody that moves around a bit and has sometimes not had a lot of access to internet and stuff, but is a old reliable Minecraft player and a musician, slide guitar player, and a lot of other things besides. And that person only likes using TeamSpeak. So if I was to find somebody in my group, hey David, and possibly accepting David, because we've talked, me and David Pixley have talked about doing the Minecraft thing, and the thing about that is, like, David's like, maybe I shouldn't be getting into serious gaming because I'll like lose myself and so on. Besides, I don't know whether you necessarily even like Minecraft that much. But it might be possible to find somebody like on the Discord or in my Patreon followers and go, hey, you want to join me for this stream? And as long as we can come up with a time to start doing it, because everything that I do only happens when I sit down and make time to do the things. And that is a general truth of life. That is a general truth of the creative life, is it always seems to, anything worth doing always seems to require dedicating time to going and doing it. Like if you're writing a book, and I've done that kind of thing too, and we'll hopefully do that in the Airwindows context as well. You don't sit around waiting for whether you get the inspiration to do a chapter. Instead, you commit to like, okay, a chapter's coming out on Monday, deal with it. And then earlier in the week, you go, oh God, I need about 6,000 to 12,000 words. And Oh, mute Tourette's, to refer to that advert thing. I use uBlock Origin. I strongly recommend that people do that kind of stuff, but I will say that it is not useless for you to be stuck sitting through adverts. I'll tell you this, Google recently, as in on June 21st, paid me. So it took about a year to save it up, and it was they sent me about $104. But so it is absolutely not wasted. You don't have to hope that I get a penny one day, because at this point they are literally sending me money for the YouTube ad things. And I'll still tell people to use uBlock Origin. Maybe they'll kill my channel hearing me say this. They do listen to all the words, and they do a they'll listen to all the words. They will make closed captions. If I mentioned the plugin Shift Gain, they will say that I'm talking naughty words and stuff. So maybe they'll be listening for the words uBlock Origin, and will nuke stuff off of YouTube for mentioning ad blockers. And I'm terribly sorry about that, because I am unrepentant. That's the only way that I can deal with the internet. So I use that kind of stuff. I've actually found a neat way of using uBlock Origin recently that, and it does. I use uBlock Origin to make Twitter tolerable, because what you can do is, like, I also have a Twitter account. It mostly just retweets plugin videos and stuff. But the Twitter has a super annoying feature. It's been around forever. And what it does is they have a, like magic moments kind of thing, and a notifications thing, and it's like right at the top where you look if you're trying to see new stuff. And it's just about a flashing light and a warning buzzer. It's this big bell icon, like, boing, visit this, we've got something to show you. And it is garbage. It's like, these are other Twitter people that we think that you should pay attention to, or here's some stuff that somebody watched that, they liked this and you will too, and all of the kind of horrible manipulative social media stuff. And that notifications thing, I had gone in and tried to defeat the notifications thing by entering a bunch of secret password things, like, #, Twitter new recommended tweets with a bunch of underscores. And these things where apparently it's part of the tweet, and you can filter that stuff and tell it, like, okay, filter everything with this. So you're basically going like, filter naughty words, like what YouTube thinks Shift Gain is about, and using it on Twitter's internal labeling of stuff. And I started doing it really hardcore, and it still lets through certain recent tweets that I've just read by people that I'm already following. So it'll light up that little bell icon thing and be like, ding, 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 you better go and look at this, you better go and look at this. And you do, and it's like, oh yeah, that guy tweeted that 15 minutes ago. I saw it in my timeline. And it's, oh, you should look at that again. What I do is I use uBlock Origin to fix that. And the way of doing that is you go to the little uBlock Origin thing in the top menu. I am looking at uBlock Origin 120 currently. And right now I'm not looking at a page, so what I should do is go to a page. uBlock Origin has blocked 203 things on the YouTube stream page, which is kind of hilarious. And if it's doing that, if it's blocking things, then the on-off switch is showing up in blue, and there's a set of icons underneath it. These icons are a, here, I'll sketch it. I've got my note-taking powers enabled. And let's see. And the final one is sliders, just like my plugins. So that's cool. No wonder uBlock Origin is my friend. So you get labels like this. And this one on the end of the lightning bolt is element zapper mode. This one is element picker mode. This one is open the logger, which just shows you what actually happened. And the one on the end with the sliders, like my plugins, is open the dashboard. And what you do is you enter element picker mode. At that point, when you move the cursor around, stuff like gets highlighted in red. And if you click on a thing, it will enter element picker mode and a window shows up. If you scroll over to the window, you can kind of see it. And it gives you options. Create, pick, and quit. I'm switching out of that now. So what you're going to do to use uBlock Origin, hey Ahmed, to make Twitter behave better or anything like that, is you enter element picker mode, set it up so that when you're mousing around, it's lighting up things in red and darkening the rest of it. You select the element that you want, and it's not necessarily just the words like, you know, notification or whatever. You try to identify the area on the screen in which the bad content is contained. And for me, that was in the notification submenu on Twitter. And I moved the cursor around. You might need to go to the edge of the area so that rather than just doing a word in the middle of the area, it's the entire little area, it's the region that is containing things like this notifications menu. And you click on that and it shows the little window at the bottom right. And the window at the bottom right shows a little thing, and it might say something like, you know, # nav menu _ notifications or something like that. You're looking at the CSS definition, the HTML style definition of what that thing is. And you hit create rather than you know, quit or whatever. When you hit create, that element starts getting basically spam blocked. And that element is the element that contains the annoying notification thing. So you've basically taken menus away from Twitter in general, because you have picked what it does is a thing kind of like this. You got your menu area, and it's kind of like that, and see, this would be a notes menu. So what you do is you're moving it around, these various areas get lit up in red. And if you go right over the word, you can probably make the word light up all by itself. But you move away from that until this whole area contained within the menu bar is lighting up, like move the cursor down to here. If the whole area is lighting up, you're pointing to the CSS area that's the container for whatever content it's gonna put in there. And you do that to delete a general category of web style content rather than just that particular word as part of the information, something like that. So yeah, I am all in favor of uBlock Origin. You can use it to make obnoxious websites behave themselves a little bit better. So that is interesting. And while I'm at it, I can use this lightning bolt to represent Elohim is asking for a dirty plug or dirty cable VST. That seems like that could be a thing. I'll add that as another line. because people are asking me for faster action on the wobbly cassette style one that I promised, and it seems legit. I've said I would do that. I am doing it. I came out with DRes 2 faster because DRes had something going on. This dirty plug thing would be related to the dirty plugin. That'd be good. Dirty plug plugin. That'd be related to the crazy low quality tape one, because it would work. It would have a similar level of intermittency and like wandering random stuff going back and forth. What that would do is it'd be making the content cut out and maybe doing something regarding like, does the breaking and making of a connection make a noise on top of having the content go out? Like I could make it be really obnoxious by oh yeah, uBlock should be showing you 113 blocks in this stream because it's YouTube, and YouTube is terrible for that kind of stuff. And the question becomes, it's almost like another you gotta let my brain be in low range sometimes. I put a bunch of work in recently, and I've done some recent stuff, so I'm going to be a little fried some of the time. Transfer function. So if your transfer function is like this for a on-off plugin with a random factor going between these things, then it'll be like either silent or turning on. But if your transfer function was like that, it's going to be a volume sputtering. And if your transfer function looks like this, then this becomes a thing where if it's going between disconnected and connected, it's building up a charge and making a sort of pop. This is not unlike what TLO72 chips do when you overdrive them. Those you can clip them and they will go to the opposite supply rail and come back out, which is also something you can do in a comparable way with wave shapers. Like you can do wave shapers that bounce off the supply rail and start going the opposite direction. Which brings me to some of the plans I've had in mind for like that pin jack thing I was talking about. Because I had done that Instagram post where I showed pin jacks. The process of me getting those was rather amusing. If you want to see, I can go and fetch the box. I'll be happy to do that if anybody asks. Otherwise, I'll just say, yeah, it's that Instagram post that I made. There is a company that makes IC sockets, and they're the kind of thing you could put on a perf board or whatever. And as it happens, I had gotten a bunch of the IC sockets, like hang on, Ahmed. What you need to do is look through some of the older live streams I've done, because there are times when I've taken time on the live stream to start telling autobiographical stories. And I don't always do that because, you know, one doesn't tell the stories over and over again. But I have done so. And I've told a number of the, you know, background details and secret tales of that kind of stuff. So if you're looking, you know, article about me, well, you can have me talking at length about that kind of stuff, just to kind of fill up time on the live stream thing. Now, where was I at? Yeah, I was talking about these IC sockets. Tell you what, why don't I just follow that idea? I'll be right back. And I bet you won't be able to see these on camera, but you can get a sense of them. And that will be interesting. I did an Instagram shot of these pin jacks. And what these are is tiny little machine thingies with a thin part that can go through a PC board, or indeed a hole in perf board. I don't know whether it's focusing or not. Actually, I can find out easily enough. Swoop over to that. Can you focus this close? How close can we focus? There we are. So it's a pin jack. It fits in the perf board. And it's this tiny little thing which has internal phosphor bronze contacts that are carefully shaped so that you can plug not the bottom of this. This is actually thinner than you need. But you can plug a test lead like you'd use in experimenter boards or like Bastel gives you. The test leads are a specific size. They're 22 gauge solid core. And those pin jacks are designed to take exactly that size. Or take pins from IC sockets. So what you're supposed to do is plug chips into them. And where they come from is I got a whole bunch of IC sockets that seemed like they were good quality, specifically for the purpose of doing things with this design, with this like pin jack design, because as you know, I have been making notes on things like kinds of chips that you can use. Now the idea is that if you get, say, the 4017 and wire it up on perf board so that your voltage power is going in here, it's going to the back of the board or whatever, and you've got these outputs, like you drive it through running into something, and then each of these sequentially turns on as the chip goes. Then you'd have a series of these chip jacks, or like a single inline socket, on each of the holes in the perf board stepping out there. So you'd have about 4 inputs, or 3 inputs, or whatever number of outputs or inputs you'd want for that particular one. And you could just sort of keep going. That determines how wide you'd have this be. And then patching things together, like patching together, you know, this output every 6 samples goes to here, and then you patch number 7 to the reset, making it cycle at a specific thing. And you can do all of that with those little pins, like in the Bastel things, where they give you these little jumpers. And they're, you've probably seen those before. 22 gauge little pins that are fairly extended, and then a little plastic thingy on top of that, and then a little wire which is usually color-coded. You could build the synthesizer out of stuff like that, and it would be incredibly compact and tiny. And that's really where the secret briefcase project is going, regarding having all these Eurorack compatible modules and hooking them up to stuff. I suppose it would eventually also end up needing banks of jacks. Like these boards are set up to show where you'd put the holes for Euro jacks. But you could also have those pins to the sides of those things, so that would be the output of your system, is those little jumper cables going to a Eurorack jack and on out or in or whatever that you would. It would be very arbitrary. It'd be like, plug whatever into whatever and see what it did. Very much like a combination of modular synthesis and circuit bending, which I don't know about you. Like that should light you up as far as a coolness idea. And then doing like this type of stuff, like figuring it out with these types of chips, each of which cost about, 37 cents each. The project would become like, can I get this together, order these things in massive bulk, like order the pin jacks. These are like maybe 15 cents if you buy them in bulk. And you can buy them individually. You can get them as just raw pins, which is what I'd be using them for. These, I took a bit of sort of basically tin snips, like a nipper kind of thing. It's actually for fingernails, but it proved a very useful task for that. And I busted up a whole bunch of IC sockets to get the raw pins out of them, because I'll be using it as raw pins. Because last week's talk of coming up with colors that are associated with different purposes of a synthesizer, different places in the synthesizer, I was looking for ways to get paints or just plastics that are made in these colors. These colors are picked because they're also the colors that you can get banana jack sockets in. I am literally talking about an all-original Airwindows synth, but we're talking hardware. We're not talking software. If you took those individual pins and put them onto a little piece of perf board like this and gave yourself enough space so that you could run the pins out to the side, and then took the acrylic paint of these various colors and just filled in around the pins to make color-coded areas for each of them, then it would reinforce it a little tiny bit. It would be bright colors and interesting to look at, and it would be totally and utterly DIY. Because rather than having to, like, okay, I'm going to need 182 jacks to be able to plug wires into to do this full-on synthesizer with this much stuff. And I'll give you a quick glimpse of this. We'd have these things. These are categories of things that would be part of this Airwindows secret briefcase synth. And there's a lot of ideas in there. If you have that many things, each of which are at least made out of it, or like one chip like these, or maybe many of them, and many patch points and stuff, you're talking maybe hundreds of jacks. If you're doing hundreds of jacks and they're Eurorack jacks, you're spending thousands of dollars just in jacks before even starting anything. And that's a horrible prospect. It's like, who can do that? But if you were spending, getting hundreds of jacks, and this is what you were using for jacks, that is, like I said, hundreds, so let's say 200. The way that price kind of stuff runs around is 200 times, let's say they're 15 cents each. Boop. You can have hundreds of jacks, like if you want to call these jacks, for 30 bucks or so. And that's what makes this kind of project interesting, is it becomes a thing where like people could start jamming on this kind of stuff. Like you can get 30 bucks can get you hundreds of these what I'm calling pin jacks, which take the little jumper cables, the miniature jumper cables, and you can plug into these jacks repeatedly with the correct cable. You get the same size of little patch cables like you use for breadboards, and use those. And those jacks are about as good as a breadboard, maybe not quite as good, but considering the number of insertions you can do with them if you pick the right kind of things. They will stand up to a fair amount of plugging and unplugging. Plus the raw cost of the parts for the things, you'll wind up having a individual module for which all the raw materials cost you like less than $10. Like less than $10 for a module that you could plug into a Eurorack synth is the target here, so that it becomes possible to do a large number of things like this and still be in a fairly reasonable zone relative to what it costs you to get into the zone using like a full-on Eurorack kind of thing or whatever. And again, it's all about the circuit bendy style. And at that level, if the cost of your entire module is less than the cost of a cup of coffee, it's your time and effort in putting it together and wiring it up. And it doesn't matter all that much if it's really fragile, because if it's really fragile and it breaks or one of the plugs work out, on the one hand, that means it becomes an intermittent socket, and maybe that's kind of cool. On the other hand, it is this tiny little pin jack, which a pin fits into rather tightly, so if it tilts slightly sideways, it's probably still going to make a decent connection. And 3, if it does wear out, then take it out and put another one in. They're super cheap. They're like less than a quarter. So it becomes a matter of how much effort you're going to make wiring and rewiring this stuff. So let me see. I'm gonna look in this, scroll back a little bit. I think people may have been asking things that I didn't get along to because I was starting to talk about this hardware synth idea that I've been pursuing. Interesting that somebody should be asking me for a bad plugin, and I switch immediately over to talking about how I was going to use IC sockets and tiny patch cables to potentially make real bad plugs for something. Let's see now. That's the target, because the thing is, what I'm looking at, especially when Airwindows is successful and is able to continue, like Airwindows is continuing to have people showing up month by month. It always just sort of slowly grows a little bit, and as that continues to develop, if it doesn't fail, or even if it did but was able to save up, I'd be able to do things like steadily acquire these raw materials, and in some cases these raw materials in massive bulk. Like, you know, I said that these little tiny pins can be, say, 15 cents for 500. So the question there becomes, who do you talk to buy 50,000? If you could spend $1,000 on just these dumb little pins, and that'd be after I tested it out and found out that it worked out real good. But if I could get like $1,000 worth of those, an entire production run, and say like, okay, these particular ones just like this exact kind. And the question becomes like, what kind of price break do you get on that? Because you're starting to deal with manufacturers on the levels that you can really beat them up on price, because they're made to operate that way. They're not made to operate in retail. You can't really buy 10 of those in any sensible way. You can go to a distributor, Mouser, DigiKey, all of those guys have these. But if you're ordering 10 of them, they're going to be charging you like 50 cents each or something like that, because it's not reasonable for anybody to go like, okay, let's pick out 1, 2, the time of somebody putting it into a little bag is what's killing you as far as the effort is concerned. But if you threw $1,000 at the distributor and said, give me a production run of these guys, they would go, okay. And then maybe you have them for 1 cent each. You do stuff like that. Like all electronics has some things that I want. The website All Electronics is great fun for finding like capacitors and things. And what I look for when I go there and look for things is something cool that I could use for these types of designs. And then do they have them in quantity? And do they say, okay, we have a large quantity? Do they say clearance? What are they doing in order to get rid of these things where they just got like a massive multiple truckload of, and they're like, okay, we'll buy that for you, sure. They probably bought the truckload of stuff for like $20. Somebody was like, take this off of our hands, please take this out of our warehouse. And All Electronics is like, okay. And at that point, they have a truckload of stuff in their warehouse. They're more willing to be parting it out one at a time. Yeah, or Alibaba. But I'm not talking about necessarily ordering off of Alibaba and going, please send me a thing. If I was to do that, I would probably be looking to do that for multicolor LEDs. Those things where it's like it lights up red if it's positive and green if it's negative. I'd probably be looking to Alibaba for something like that and taking the risk as to like if I got like $700 of LEDs from Alibaba that were purported to be like this, would it be the real deal? Would it be functional at all? Or would it be garbage and they don't light up? And I'd have to take the risk on that. With All Electronics, you can buy one of whatever thing it is, and you know that they just bought these from some kind of clearance place or whatever. They bought it from some company going out of business or something like that. So if you get one of them, you can get as many more of that exact thing as you like. It might be kind of old, it might be worn out or tarnished or whatever, but you can get exactly what the thing is. And the thing I have my eye on more than anything else, really, although I look for things like potentiometers, stuff like that, they keep like 10K and 1K potentiometers on hand, I think. There's stuff that All Electronics typically just tries to keep available, but then there's other stuff where they're like, okay, weird part with a wiring harness attached to it, we have 50,000 of them. What will you offer us for? And in that case, what you get is the individual one, and then you look at their price breakdown. And when they say, like, we have a large quantity, that is a hint. That means that you can say, give me 1,000 of them, and they'll have a massive price break. Or you could go and say, how much for all of what you've got? And that is an interesting prospect, because there is a particular part that they've got, and it is a like 300 millihenry transformer that's just a choke. It's not really a transformer because it's just a wire choke, but it's a toroidal choke. So it's a part that gives you inductance, and it's a fairly heavy little chunk of wire. So you could run the entire signal through it and it would be, just fine or better. It comes in exactly one size, like what you get is what you get. And since it's toroidal, the wire goes around the thing like a donut, in a loop, meaning that it won't pick up hum. Because that's the thing about toroidal transformers, is they're typically much more expensive than regular inductors, but they don't hum. So yeah, I'm looking at that because much like a particular kind of toggle switch that I've also got from All Electronics, I got some of these sort of long baseball bat shaped toggle switches with like PC pins on one side, and then there's no threading on the bushing on the other side. And they also say we have large quantities of these. So I got a bunch and I made a mixing board out of like individual resistors that was programmed in binary, and which actually worked. I did some stuff on that, although it was very cumbersome. And And I still have some of these switches from that particular source, and they're still selling them. It's years later, and they still have these in their warehouse. So that's the kind of thing. Is you're talking to the surplus wholesaling place about getting some particular kind of thing that they have a cajillion of, and they would most likely be willing to sell you everything that they've got, which means two things. One, for some kind of reasonably cheap thing, like depending upon how much they would take for, like, let me take all of these away from you now, you'd be able to get a massive price break on the individual parts. And two, once you've done that, you're the only one that has those parts anymore. So I could do fancy Airwindows kinds of things, and it's like, okay, for this particular design, use a 300 millihenry toroidal tiny inductor. Oh, you don't have those? Okay, well then use something else. But the ones that I'm making, the ones that I'm making available are the special ones that have the real inductor. Not because you set that up, but because that's just the natural outcome of doing it in that way. So it becomes a like collectible, hard to get kind of thing, but not through your refusing to let other people have the part, but through your getting the part so that you can sell kits of the thing at cost. Like you get your pins for 1 cent because you got $1,000 worth of them. You buy out all the inductors, and then you put together some kind of little piece of equipment that uses that stuff and sounds amazing because the design of it, you'd have to be able to use the inductors and things. And then you start putting out kits, and the kits are kind of like Raspberry Pis or whatever, where they make one of them available for $5, and you only get to order one at that price. You can order any number of ones that you want with the header and stuff included for like $17, but they're making it possible for people to jump in at like hilariously, insanely cheap. And that, with homebrew circuit bendy style synthesizers, is something that kind of lights me up. I just love the fact that you can get CMOS chips and things like that, where you can wire those suckers up with just some wire and perf board and things, and it's possible to put this stuff together so that the individual components for, say, a transient shaper for your control voltages up top, or indeed the sub-octave thing for the Moog Mother 32, all of the parts that go into that sub-octave thing are almost certainly less than $5. So in theory, I could be sending people out kits to make sub-octave things that would work hooked up to a Mother 32 or anything else that operates that way, and be charging like $5 or $3 plus shipping. Actually, no, there's 3 jacks there. Each of those jacks are worth at least $1, so it'd be more like, $5, $6 plus shipping. So yeah, I have gone on about this a great deal because my feeling around that kind of stuff is that I can't beat what hardware stuff can do in software regarding something like a synth. I can't do that, and there's a number of reasons why I'm hot for the analog things. I have this little USB musical keyboard that I was gonna plug into here, and then for the chat I was going to go and be like, here, let me show you some patches on things. I'm going to experiment with like bringing up Massive or FM8 or something like that as the standalone, and then run it. But unfortunately, I can't do that because I no longer have FM8 or Massive. I had both of those things back when I was doing some of those videos, like the music videos. There's a track that I did called Cayenne Pony that uses FM8 with a sort of resonant filter thing on a feedback path as part of the frequency modulation that does a diabolical wub sound. that really does this grungy animalistic thing going on. And I wanted to show that off, and I can't find my information as far as the licensing for Massive and FM8. I changed, like I redid the operating system, and I changed to an operating system, and I changed to a new disk, and tried to migrate stuff along. And somewhere along the way, I lost track of the standalone Massive and FM8 that I bought. I bought with money. And now I don't know where that information is anymore. And I did a little searching. Maybe I'll do more searching. I'll hunt for it again. But, you know, rather than program software synthesizers, I had some of the Native Instruments ones. I had Monarch. I think I had Monarch. I definitely have Razor, because that's the only thing that I can still find that I had. I don't know if I have Serum, but I had Razor. I had Massive and fooled with it a little bit. I had FM8 and not only fooled with it a little bit, but I enjoyed the heck out of it. I'm not sure that I would be able to beat that. If I was doing an FM synth, it's like, what would I do that could be better than FM8? Like nothing. That's already done. What I could do, I suppose, is make one for free, but that involves a lot of both receiving like inputs and things. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying that to do that, I'd want to be doing it in AU and VST simultaneously, like I do with the plugins. I'm not up to that. I'm not currently making MIDI-enabled plugins or software synthesizers, and I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'm saying that's a really big learning curve. And although the stuff that I do would relate to such a task, making an awesome soft synth is nothing I'm going to do anytime soon. I've got a lot of other stuff to do before that, and it's a big steep learning curve, and there's other people who have been dedicated to doing that for a long time who are doing a really good job. Apart from the fact that I can no longer use my Native Instrument stuff because I lost the licenses and I can't find where I've got it written down, and I can't find the information on that stuff. Again, I found what I can log into to tell me that I have a Razor license. Is that what the one? Yeah, I think it is. So I can get that going if I want. I think I have Reactor, but that might just be what it takes to run Monarch, because I think I got that at some point. But you know, there's a lot going on with that, and you usually cannot get away with just a slider-based interface because there's too much to do. Also, another angle of that is, since I'm so into modular, since I'm playing with this page here, I can talk you through some of the stuff on this, but this was the notes that I made for what I would do in the secret briefcase to make categories of parts. Some of these would be a chip and some connections and power. Some of these would be more complicated or even very complicated. But having all of this together would give me a rig that's kind of similar to those giant Moog cabinets where you have all this different stuff and all these different options for various things to do. Well, as far as making open source modular systems, there's already Rack, VCV Rack. Why should I do something like that when VCV Rack already exists? Why am I not using VCV Rack? Because I'm not happy with its performance on my non-pro iMac, and I'm not that impressed with its sound relative to like bit banging, or not bit banging, wire banging and circuit bending raw CMOS chips. Like, I like the sound that I get out of analog chips and analog gear. I'm building stuff in the modular thing, and I'm trying to come up with ways to do that in ever more accessible fashion. But I can't get the performance that I get out of some of this stuff out of a plugin. Not even close. These things are my inspiration for trying to make the plugins better. I don't find that they are yet a replacement or a thing where I would be putting a lot of effort into trying to do it that way. Although I did say, last year that I was going to port plugins to VCV Rack. I don't have that going as of yet. I got far enough to be able to start making, and maybe it's a good thing because I think VCV Rack has gone to release candidate lately. I'm not positive, but I seem to remember that they've gone from like a 0.1.6 or something like that to like a 100. The Andrew who does VCV Rack has got to some kind of release candidate state. And what you want is to have people get to that condition so that they're not making changes on you. And you can start developing further stuff, hopefully without it changing out from under you, because that is the thing. So I see EB is asking me some questions. And Anders mentioned that there's a DX7 in open source. There could be that. There's also that. It's like I'm doing plugins and I'm making code available for people who are also doing stuff like that. People are already dedicated to making synth plugins and things, including ones that are in open source. So to some extent, it's like, respect the fact that there's other people doing that. I don't necessarily have to be doing it. You can if you say Dexit instead of FM8, well, I could check that out. I mean, FM synthesizers, even in hardware, are a software type thing. I don't necessarily see me doing them in that it's just an implementation detail, really. Yeah, I thought that VCV had hit its release. Now, here's another thing, though. Let me step away from here one more time. Raspberry Pi. Here's the thing, is that doing things like FM synths, I am much less interested in being like, I'm going to do Dexed, but from me, and the probably huge amount of effort it would take to do something like that. And I'm much more likely to be interested in like, okay, so can I port Dexed to a Raspberry Pi? Use the, you're going to have to ask the question about sample value numbers again. I remember seeing it, but then it went by. Wasn't it like, can you have sample value numbers beyond 1 and -1? And the answer is yes, you can. Ask more about that question if you need more, because I think that's a simple answer, but maybe I'm misunderstanding you. What I would be excited about, rather than like, I want to make a Dexed, but from me, and release it as a elaborate soft synth and maintain it for people and stuff like that. I can't see the point of that, even though FM synth is the most well-suited to being contained within a computer of anything I can think of. Because, and this is why I got such good results out of FM8. Compared to some of the other ones. And I think that the native instrument stuff sounds great for soft synths. Honestly, I am like this close to being like, I endorse those, because even though I can't use mine because I lost the information about them, I was generally about as happy with the sound of those soft synths as anything else I've ever experienced. And it all kind of fails to rise to the level of using actual hardware. That's just how I feel about it. It's all a little bit plastic. It's all kind of like Axis Virus or something. And that can be very, Axis virus, or perhaps the best example is a Nord. If you get one of those Nord virtual analogs, that actually has a sound of its own. And it's pretty musical, and it's pretty darn usable, but I'd still rather be working with analog gear most of the time. So what I would be more interested in is, like, this is a large Raspberry Pi. It's like a 3 or something. They now make smaller ones that start where this set of headers is and goes down like about half as big as that. And you can buy a Raspberry Pi Zero for $5, as long as you buy only one of them at a time. You can buy it with the header and a little more for like $17 and buy as many of them as you want. And you can buy what they call hat that sits on top of this header, and you solder it in, that will give the Raspberry Pi, which is a tiny Linux computer complete with a desktop, a audio out that'll do 24-bit 192K. Boom. So naturally, I am substantially more interested in going like, okay, can I run Dexid or whatever? Yeah, Dexid on a Raspberry Pi at 24-bit 192K and patch things into these little pins here so that I can use it as part of the rack and use it as like this tiny little synthesizer that would fit on a panel about the size of this. You'd put it on sort of sideways and it would go like that, as long as your case was deep enough to handle it. And then you'd have an FM synthesizer for, assuming that you wired it up based on the $5 one. Total parts probably less than $30. Performance completely beyond anything else that you're likely to get. It's going to blow the heck out of Kimi's Taiko, that's for sure. And, well, unless you wanted the sort of old Nintendo Sega Genesis style FM that one has. You can do stuff like that, and I find that very exciting and interesting. Now, to get back to some of these other questions before they scroll right off the top of the screen. Scroll down. Yeah, Casios do have a neat phase distortion sound. I don't have Serum, I don't think. Things like Dexid loading DX patches, that'd be weeks of work for me to get all that kind of stuff together and look up all the information and so on. And I need to leave that stuff to the people who have been doing the work all along. I have not tried a Casrod plug because I basically make my own. I don't know the ProR from FabFilter, so I can't answer that either. By all means, keep posted on that kind of stuff. It's interesting to hear people's opinions of things. I would like to do Airwindows models in VCV2 now that they're hitting 1.0.0. It might be a good time to launch into that again. Although I'm going to have to... things are going to have to continue to happen in the sort of regular path, because I need to not be getting a stroke like my brother, or two he had. He survived and he's doing okay, but my opinion is the reason that this happened to him is that he's incredibly tightly wound and incredibly demanding of everybody and himself. And I can be like that, and I don't feel I should be going out that way. I don't think I would be happy to have a stroke and then have to struggle to keep up with the stuff that I already do from a position of being like sick and my left arm and like not working or whatever. I don't feel that that would be good. I don't think you necessarily like a very stroke victim. My dad was like that for a long time before he passed on last year. And a lot of this is not so much us working hard as just worrying and fretting and stress. I'm sure that's what took my dad out. To some extent, I contributed to it because I was not shy about being we didn't always get along super well. But I know, because he was my dad, that he felt personally responsible for any number of things that really weren't his property. Like when I was a kid, I would go out to fly kites with my dad and brothers and such. And if we went out to the parking lot of an industrial area where it's a big old area to fly kites in, and it rained, the kids would be all upset, and my dad would be miserable as if it was his responsibility to go and see that it didn't rain. He really acted as if that was his fault, and that he was responsible for making it not have rained. And this combined with any number of things, like my mom was first an alcoholic and then got on drugs before she got clean, because she got clean before I did. We were both on drugs many years ago. This is about 30 years ago or so. But there was a time that my mom was a heroin addict nurse, stealing drugs from work. And Dad was presumably also feeling responsible for having, literally a drug addict feel happy and secure and, happy with life and stuff. And that ain't possible. You get somebody who becomes a heroin addict, you can't have a positive mental attitude and keep them satisfied, because that's not what keeps them satisfied anymore. And, being a recovering addict myself, I know this. Only thing that really works there is people stopping using and doing this elaborate sort of spiritual rediscovery kind of thing where you learn to let go. And that's probably what has saved my life, because by now I think I would have stroked out if I hadn't had to go through that, if I hadn't had to get clean and learn to let stuff go. Because we don't get into being drug addicts because it seems like a good idea to do at the time. That thing that's been damaging my brother, and he's had strokes, and my dad did as well. He didn't get into drinking or drugs or whatever, but he did stroke out at the age of, 60 or something, like 50, 40, 60, family. And I thought that might be me, but there's a reason why it hasn't been. I do get very stressed, but there's a lot of stuff that goes on that I just straight up have to let go. And here's an example. I mentioned earlier in the stream about how I got a critic showing up on the Airwindows webpage on the podcast post. They're like, "Oh, I checked out your music thing, and here are all the things that you're doing wrong, and it's really bad. But you should do better. Your mom and dad would be proud of you that you were doing this." And I was like, I wanted to make some kind of nasty response, and I totally didn't, because it's like, either they meant well or they didn't, but there's no real benefit to doing that. And I wanted to say, no, they wouldn't want me doing this at all, and nor did they care. Or any, like, my mom was in recovery with me, so I was closer with her than anybody else in the family. She didn't care that I did music. She didn't like it or want to hear any of it. It was not valuable. And the guy's criticism, apart from, this isn't bad, you should do better, was, you have these hi-hats, because the last jam that I did, I had like an 8th note hi-hat going a lot, and I just had it on the background, and I'd thrown a bunch of reverb onto it. So the guy complained to me that and this is a good little technical tip for those of you who also do this kind of stuff. He complained to me that the hi-hat was making everything on YouTube be all washed out, and the compression just turned into a pile of mush, and it ruined everything and it spoiled it for him, and please don't. And there's an element of truth to that, because the choice that I did was to pick a different kind of reverb. It's the same box that I use for reverb, but it was a particular bank that was a little bit quicker decay than I usually use, and ran the hat loudly into it for pretty much the entire time, meaning that the background of my sound was just constantly while I did everything else. While I did the beats, while I was playing guitar, while I was doing stuff. And the guy was like, yeah, the kick is good, the bass is good, and the guitars you should learn to play better, and, as they do. But the hi-hat's a terrible bad decision, you should never do that. And there's a solid element of truth to that, because the thing about it is, yes, the reverb on the hi-hats was ruining the encoding on YouTube. Yes, it was deteriorating the audio stuff of it very much. That's one of the reasons that I used the SoundCloud to upload raw, high-quality 24-bit by 96K output. So if you want to hear that the way it's meant to be, he was making comments about like, yeah, I know in your studio it sounded good, but those of us out in the real world don't get to hear it like that. Then I upload that stuff to SoundCloud. So you download the thing and you will get the high-res stuff. But what he had to say about that ruining the YouTube encoding was absolutely correct. And in fact, I'm inclined to take that direction and listen to it and go, yeah, okay, I think next time I'm not going to put the hat in reverb. Next time, I'll have the hat just be dry. I'll have some of these percussive things be dry, and the reverb can hang around being like pads and things like that. And it does take the raw audio for 2 hours of 24-bit 96K is a couple 3 gigabytes. It doesn't really take days for me to upload to SoundCloud because of what I do. I can justify some fairly beefy internet bandwidth, and I would like to make it be even better. But I do have enough bandwidth that, like, for my YouTube videos, I am uploading ProRes. I'm taking my captures, and this might actually be a way for me to do the Minecraft thing I was talking about for the last half hour or so. Maybe we can set aside the hard work stuff and talk about that a little bit in ways that we could maybe get that happening. But for my YouTube videos, I am capturing stuff using ScreenFlow, which is a way of very efficiently capturing like raw computer screen and capturing images from the video or so on, and it captures all that stuff pretty darn efficiently. It'll be like more than a few gigs for recording for even a fairly short period of time. But then when I bring it into ScreenFlow and output an output file for the Airwindows videos, and this is a glimpse of like what it takes to upload things to my internet. I'm outputting it as ProRes, which is an intermediate file format. And my outputs are 20 to 30 gigabytes in size. That's what I'm uploading to YouTube. You never see it because YouTube transcodes everything no matter what it is that you gave them. You could give them like exactly the kind of file that they put out, and they're still never going to just send it straight out. They're always going to transcode it, meaning they're going to recompress it again. And that does so much sonic and visual damage that to me it's worth just uploading this extremely high-res stuff. And that's kind of opposite to what the streaming is like, because, yeah, I'm saving this full resolution file for the SoundCloud, But when I stream, oh my God, I'm using OBS just like I'm using right now. And OBS is crushing stuff down to this very narrow bandwidth. It's like 2,000 bits, K a second or something like that. And the streaming is always just repulsively low quality. So the guy really had a point in a sense. If that was my only output style and the only way that I let people hear stuff, it'd be an even more relevant concern. Now I am giving people full resolution, at least for the audio, but still, it was a relevant observation. And the way that relates to like the sort of spiritual side of like, are you giving yourself a stroke through just freaking out over everything? When somebody raises concerns like that to me, to an extent, I have to let it go. I have to be like, oh wow, I did a thing that is good enough that somebody is tearing it a new one, that somebody is criticizing it meanly and harshly because all they can see is like, oh, this should be better, this deserves to be better, but it's not, and this is what I think would make it better. That's kind of what happens. That's kind of what happens with things, is you start out in complete obscurity and really nobody gives a crap. You can do your thing, like you can fill a notebook with stuff, like this very notebook is filled with stuff. And for a large chunk of that, what you get is nobody cared. All of this, nobody cares. Nobody wants to know what it is. It's useless. You move beyond it as you do it, and you're like, I don't care either. And then eventually you get to a point where you're doing something that is worth criticism. And what that means is some people will show up and just like, oh, let me say something that's mean. I can make this guy sad. But then you're also going to get people who are like, I know some of my stuff, but I'm just not socialized enough to approach it with this diplomatic thing of like how best to get this person actually to do what I want. And that is really the thing, is it's like being a producer or something, which might also be interesting to like my patrons and people on the stream and stuff, is if you are a producer, your job is how to con people into doing what you think necessary. Knowing what's right is not enough. Knowing what's right is not nearly enough. The trick is getting people to do what you think is right. And so when people come along and they're like, oh yeah, your stream sucks, you did this thing wrong, you should do that much better in future. Or, your stream sucks because your guitar playing sucks because you play all these wrong notes. On the one hand, it's like, well, can they get me to play all the right notes? And the answer is not necessarily. I grew up on like Zappa and Captain Beefheart, and often I want dissonant, ugly notes, or I'm trying to pursue some kind of melodic thing that is going through the series of chord changes that are really kind of challenging, and I'm just not that good of a jazz guy to always be able to keep up with the difficulty of the chord sequences that I can construct with the modular synthesizers. Like, it's typically going through a series of key changes on top of a series of chord changes, and that can go to some very strange places where it's almost like giant steps or whatever. It's going to, or giant steps but less clever, where it's going to these big changes in basic key and not necessarily in a way that's obvious. So it's like the backing track is playing wrong notes, and then the guitar playing is playing wrong notes, and everything is ew and yuck. And I'll be doing that because I'm trying to research that kind of stuff. I'm trying to get to places that are interesting to me, that there's something out there that I think would be good to get to. And I don't know if it's absolutely there, but I have a sense that there's something there to be had. And that's what I do. That's what I do basically as a person. Let me go and scroll stuff and select into stuff a little bit so that I don't lose things. Yeah, Duck said, Serum, yes, Serum is the dead mouse one. I'm impressed with that. Serum's good. right diet and healthy lifestyle, that's why I exercise. And I try to control my diet in a number of different ways. You know, if I was parading around in a swimsuit, you'd be like, oh my God, Chris from Airwindows is beefcake. But I'm hanging around in a monk-style bathrobe, so you're out of luck there. I don't know if there's a relevant way on YouTube that one can even do that kind of show-offy stuff, because I think they'll kill your channel for parading around showing male-presenting nipples or something. I don't know. Digitally half-waving rectifying boa is a relevant question here. Digitally half-wave rectifying process audio. Basically, the coding principle for that is that I can tell in code if something is above or below 0. I'll take the variable that I'm using, and I'll do an if statement and put stuff in parentheses so that that is the thing which is going to be true or false. And then I'll go like, okay, if parentheses, meaning is this true, and a variable larger than 0. And if it says a variable is larger than 0, I'll know, like, okay, I can use my algorithm on this. If that's not true, or if I'm doing is it less than 0 as well, then I'll have a different section of code that runs in the event that the thing is less than 0. And if the algorithm only works on positive numbers, what I'll do is I'll go, okay, do the algorithm on the opposite. I'll go a negative variable, and it'll give me a positive result. And then what I'll be doing to revert it back is I'll go, okay, remember that original value? Was it less than 0? Parentheses is less than 0. If that's true, oh hey, I have other little code that I can run that only runs if the original thing was still less than 0. And I can do anything within that new area of code, including go, if the original thing was less than 0, then take the result of the other thing that I had and go negative that. And what that does is it takes the result of my algorithm that only works on positive stuff and mirrors it, flips it so that it is negative now. And it does the same thing that it would have done if the algorithm worked on negative in the first place. Basically, I'm just watching and going like, do I need to convert everything to positive? Or I'll use something called FABS, F-A-B-S, parentheses, which makes all stuff be positive regardless. And then I'm just doing these comparisons. I'm looking at the original variable coming in and going, is this less than 0? And if it is, I'm just taking the result of my always positive stuff and just flipping it over, flipping it to negative when that's relevant. So basically that's the coding principle. The coding principle is if statements and being able to flip stuff to negative. And it's very useful and something that I've done a lot about. So what Bo says here, abs process 2111, kinda. What you do is be like, fabs process, and rather than replace the stuff that you started with, make a new variable, make a new piece of information based on what we started with, but leave the stuff that we started with untouched so that you can continue to check as to whether it's negative or not. And the point afterwards, you're starting with like 2, 0, 1, not 2, -1, 1. The output of your process is always going to be 0, 1. But then what you're doing is you're taking it and going like, okay, was the input stuff negative? If so, let's take all of this process, and then it only goes from 0 to -1. And we just don't do that phase flipping thing if we don't need to. So that's kind of the correct way. Let me see whether I can phrase it correctly. I'm typing. This is not really code, but it would end up kind of like that. It would end up like output becomes the process of Fab's input, but we're not changing input. And then we look at input, go, is it less than 0? In that case, output equals negative output. And that's how we do that stuff of changing the process. Bernie observes that using SoundCloud for fellow audio files, I will mention they don't let you download the raw files by default. Every single time you got to go into your upload place, upload your enormous gigabytes in files, and I also have to pay them a bunch of money to do that. But what I get in terms of the sheer amount of space from paying them is pretty reasonable for a hosting service, so I do that. So you have to tell them, allow people to download the original file, because when you just hit stuff on the web page, you're not getting that original file. When you hit stuff on the web page, SoundCloud is re-encoding things too, just like YouTube is. They re-encode it a little bit better, but that's not the way to get the high-res stuff. You have to enable downloads to let people have the high-res stuff. And when you do that, then they let people download the raw stuff that you uploaded, and that's how that works. So the SoundCloud streaming off of the web page is definitely pretty low quality. You got to use the download. You got to enable the download. Otherwise, it's just going to be more streaming quality stuff. So 48 laws of power. Oh, sounds creepy. I don't know about that. Maybe I'm finding my own little ways to power, to whatever power is relevant. David Pixley has a harsh observation on uBlock. It's probably true. Welcome to the internet. They may get hacked. My pony searching history for fandom of My Little Pony will be sold to everybody who buys the hacked info. One way of dealing with that is like, hey, if you want to go into politics, maybe you shouldn't be you. It's like, I get along pretty well without a lot of blackmailable qualities because I don't do much that is horrifying. And the stuff that I do that is horrifying is like what's been recently shown on my streams of like I did a song about My Little Pony characters that's kind of like a cheap trick, called Discord Welcome Home. And, I'm a fan of this dumb kids show. That could be considered terrible blackmailable material and stuff. And my answer is I don't care. I'm going to BronyCon for its last version that is coming out. And if anybody wants to talk to me about that, then please do so. I'll catch up with the Airwindows users there. Airwindows ponies. Yay. I actually have fans of my writing at that convention, and I do fairly well with that too. In fact, just for laughs, I'm going to take a quick blink. You know how I have like 508 now Patreon subscribers for my Airwindows stuff? Well, with my crazy pony thing, I have 790 followers of my pony writings. But the pony writings are all very naughty because I have no life, and so that's my only outlet for certain things. So that is the kind of thing where it's like, might as well run with it. If you don't want to find out about that stuff, you basically won't, because there's no sense crossing the streams. But as far as people selling off your porn searching history to everybody who buys the hacked info, one possible avenue for that is publish and be damned. And in many ways, if you don't want to stroke out and be terrified of bad things happening all the time, that attitude of publish and be damned is very useful to have. Like, I do the stuff that I do, or I play the guitar playing that I play and stuff, and if you don't like it, then, oh well, that's too bad. But I'm not always available to change stuff because there are people who exist who think that I'm bad. There's going to be people who think that I'm bad. In a way, that's almost like the being worth criticism thing of if I'm making an artwork of some kind and it's gotten to the point where somebody's like, oh yeah, that stream really sucked. You shouldn't be putting reverb on hats and it ruined everything and you should never do that again. Oh, also learn to play guitar better. And it's like, you know, okay, I can change things based on that. I'm experimenting and so on. But on a deeper sense, if that was what I wanted, then that person would just have to go and pound sand because I'm not going to necessarily change for them. And it's about being able to do that kind of attitude lovingly and with respect rather than like, no, you're bad. You're bad because you said that I was bad. Ugh. It's like, you know, no, I hear you. I think I've parsed some of the things that you said that were relevant observations. As far as the rest of it, maybe we just have different purposes. And that's just going to be, you know, how that's going to be. Absolute value. Yep. I will be I have taken some time recently, which is how I got derailed into what Raspberry Pis are doing these days. I took some time to set up the old Apple IIe, and I was going to try to set it up with like a flat screen and do some live coding of that so that I can talk people through doing some basic stuff. And that's still something that I could do for these streams, like in some future time. I'd need to put it in some location where you could see it on the camera or get another camera and use that. But because basically this particular stream with this camera, since this is not a gaming stream or anything, I'm using about 20% CPU on all of this. So I could probably bring in another camera and it would still be able to do that without falling over. But I had started to fool with the Apple IIe, mostly because I wanted to figure out how I could run the slots as like trigger inputs and outputs for a Eurorack system. And I don't know whether you can or not. I still haven't really gotten very far as far as that's concerned. But I could be doing a certain amount of that, and that would certainly show you some of the things like, you know, the abs and the math things and stuff. It would be in BASIC, unless it was an assembly language, which is a whole other thing. But that said, that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it would be to straight up switch over to coding on a Raspberry Pi on stream to do stuff that way. Because one of the things about it is that I could get a monitor for the Apple IIe, and quite a good one really, and it might cost between like $50 and $150, and I could throw a bunch of money at that. But the Raspberry Pi Zero boards are $5, and it's much more relevant, and the clock speed is much higher, and various things having to do with that. So I do have some decisions to make as to where I want to place some of these things. What would be really interesting is if I put these little pin jack sockets to where this header goes and have one that just kind of sits on the outside surface of Eurorack stuff, so you could patch individual jacks and things into the running computer as it went. That would be kind of nuts. That'd be a little bit amazing. So more will be revealed around that kind of stuff, surely. Let me have a quick look through some of these other questions and things. How do you deal with aliasing at Nyquist? Low pass filter? Not necessarily. That's a very complicated question. Aliasing, I've done a bunch of flashcards and things about that. And it's when you're generating a distortion harmonic and you're generating it beyond the Nyquist frequency, it reflects back downwards again and becomes an unpleasant noise, basically. So what you'd be first doing is going, how many of these harmonics am I generating with my distortion circuitry or with my compressions, changes in volume and stuff. And you don't necessarily generate aliasing just because you're generating compression. It's about whether you're generating a harmonic that is too high. And one thing you can do is filter before distorting, which is what I do in Unbox, where it's generating a harmonic, but the signal going into the distortion, which is a very gentle, soft distortion, so it's only doing one harmonic at a time, is filtered so there aren't any harmonics above a certain amount that are able to produce that problem. And then also for a fair amount of things that I do, I don't necessarily deal with aliasing because people have these exaggerated opinions of aliasing and how good people are at dealing with it. And it's an inherent problem with the sampling theorem. And there's no graceful way to get around it other than to do things that aren't so subject to that problem. I am not at all sure whether you could generate aliasing with something like console channel and then ungenerate it with console bus. I don't think that's reversible. I think you run into a problem there. When people say, oh, this is a plugin or this is a software synthesizer or something, and it runs oversampling. When I do sample rate conversion, I'm using a program called Brick. There is also a PC-style program of the same nature. And Brick is one of those sample rate converters where you set it up to batch process, and it'll go through your 3-minute file in about 15 minutes. And the reason is that it's basically doing a calculation involving almost every sample in the entire file. Pre and post when the file begins and ends. And doing real oversampling is just insanely expensive. It's just a monstrous CPU load. Like, the way to really seriously do it in earnest is, rather than do no oversampling and get aliasing, or do like, oh, this is 4 times oversampling, is to do this insane overkill oversampling. So you're basically reconstructing something as if you were recapturing it from scratch. And all of your parameters are affected by these tiny little bits of information all through the file. And it's incredibly expensive. And when people say, oh, my plugin does oversampling, and I also get, you can have 5 of them instantiated on every track and stuff, basically that tells you that their oversampling is not really very good. You can't just do low quality sample rate conversion without ruining the sound. It ruins the sound in entirely different ways. And there are ways that I personally don't like. I don't like the sound of bad math, excessive bad math. The thing that Brick does, there's this old Mac OS X program that I'm using for the purpose, is massive overkill as far as it really goes, the full Monty, as far as just calculating out the sample rate conversion at extraordinary detail. And it's able to give frequencies that go like right up to the Nyquist frequency and then don't bounce or alias at all. In fact, they seem to emphasize being at the Nyquist frequency, but still without the tiniest trace of reflection back down into aliasing. And that's because of how much processing it has to do. It's just, it brings my Retina iMac to a crawl. It just grrr, and then the fan starts going and so on because it has so much to do. You can't really get around the need for that much calculation by saying like, oh, the plugin has anti-aliasing and there, that it has oversampling and therefore it's good. Like run a sine sweep through something like that and watch, and you'll see that you're still getting aliasing issues, but now you've got an incredible amount of overprocessing as well. So I'm just, as far as the aliasing noise is concerned, I think it depends upon what you're doing and what your needs are. You can get around certain types of things, and you can have relatively gentle saturation algorithms that don't produce a whole chain of harmonics to start with. And when I'm doing a lot of crazy distortion and stuff, I'd rather do it in analog. I'm not really that interested in trying really hard to get a mediocre result out of digital by bringing my computer to its knees just to do something that I can do in analog much more effectively anyway. So yeah, that's where that kind of thing sits with me. Oh, we're getting towards the last 10 minutes or so. Cosmic Feed says hi. Hi, Cosmic Feed. David Pixley says, don't change your hats for DF. Well, it was an experiment. It's not really changing my hats for him. I like having hats be lacking in reverb anyway. So it's not really that. It's more like I feel called out for something that I didn't have to do and didn't especially like that much in the first place. It was kind of fun having a shimmery reverb thing going on all the time because of the hats, but I wouldn't call it truly necessary, and it's not always what I want to do. So put it this way, if I want to do that again, I totally will. I don't think I would keep it on for 2 hours though, which is what I did last time around. And that gets you into a sort of Aphex Twin zone. I was recently reading about how some of Aphex Twin's ambient stuff is mixed to DATs in long play mode, which means he preferred to mix to a format that was 12-bit nonlinear digital. And that's kind of interesting. That's kind of what I recently put out on DRes2. And I had people showing up on the DRes2 threads and things saying, it's generating DC offset on the output. And I was like, okay, let me see whether I can come up with some sort of one-piece thing I can do where I'll make a plugin that you just throw it on, it has no controls, and it more or less contains stuff to within what an analog circuit would be, with sort of band limited, like a bit of a high pass and a bit of a roll off at Nyquist without being anything too obvious. And the reaction to that was like, yeah, cool, okay. So that's kind of where I stand with that. It's like, I think I'll do something like that. And with a bit of luck, that'll help. But I didn't offer to build in a effective high pass filter to block all forms of DC that could potentially come out of, and it was DRes2 with the hardness control partly between full soft and full hard, and that's kind of like an effect result anyway. I'm not sure how useful it. I don't think people should necessarily be using that as a basic thing, although of course some people will. Anyway, hi David Pixley, the Muzzle 3. That's clearly something. It even includes DRes, so that's right up your alley. But stuff like that generates little issues. Sometimes I'll just leave that and be like, if you're using this in such a way that causes this problem, then maybe address it with something else or whatever. But I want the raw output of this to be simple and direct and clean. And that's certainly the case with DRes2, because what I got with that was pretty pleasing. I'm pleased with what it produced. So let's see. Elhayim says digital distortion is kind of snake oil. Well, no, actually, I despise digital distortion, but I'm not prepared to incur large amounts of one kind of digital distortion just to pretend to get away from another. That's my thing with the aliasing thing. It is a very serious problem, but the ways people use in plugins to try to get around it, I feel like they do more harm than good, and I don't like the sound of what they produce, so I'd rather just go with the raw output. I'd rather just go with the simplest processing possible. And there's lots of stuff you can do that doesn't produce lots of digital, that doesn't produce lots of aliasing. So, yeah. Maybe what you mean is people offering to give you digital distortion that's just as good as analog distortion is snake oil. And I could see that. I mean, you can do it, but it's a lot harder and it's a lot more expensive CPU-wise, and I don't feel it's really possible to get it, like, quite there. So, before I go, I'll mention that I haven't heard back from White Sea on the Minecraft thing yet, and that might be because he is simply too busy to do it. It is very legit that people be like, oh, this would be a cool thing, and then you're looking at your actual workload. And when it comes time that Chris from Airwindows says, I need you to give me a time a week. Let's set aside a time that we're going to be doing this, because it's not real unless you've built it into your schedule. And if that's the point that White Sea or anybody says, like, oh, I can't do that. Oops, sorry. That's totally legit. That said, since I haven't heard back from him on the subject, it might still be possible. I don't know. He is also too busy to think about that kind of stuff too much or respond real quickly, so I can relate to that really well. Everybody that I know that's doing stuff, building, working for a livelihood on the internet is in that boat, so we're all kind of in the same boat there. And with regard to that, I've actually been putting some effort into getting together the sort of system, figuring out the ways that I'd be doing it. Like, I've got the servers up and running. I've got the plugins that I'm using, because servers get plugins too, up and running and working. It's doing a thing of regenerating stuff, and I've got that operating, and I've tested it out, and it produces the correct behavior. If you join that server, and currently I have it running but rebooting itself every day, but there's also the possibility of scheduling it and then having it only come alive for the times that we would be streaming on it or recording on it. Because I also have a choice between trying to stream using a computer that really can't handle it and putting out like 10 frames a second, or recording and not live streaming, but instead recording stuff and then uploading it as like a couple 3 hours of just chilling out jamming, and it wouldn't be live, but it would look way, 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 way better because I've done that before and it works out pretty good. And then there is like if I got people together who wanted to do this, then what you would basically do is go, here we are in this strange Minecraft world that regenerates every day. And it also has this strange modded stuff going on that's all centered around snow. Only problem, there's no snow at spawn or anywhere near spawn. So the first order of business is to go on a pilgrimage and somewhere to find snow. At which point then we have access to all the crazy moddy stuff. I have a little cheat sheet as far as sort of hints of what you can do with the various modded stuff. I've got an enormous map that is scaled down, it's like 30,000 blocks by 20,000 blocks. There's a 10,000 block square in the inside, and it's showing all the regions, but it isn't showing any coordinates. It's just showing the 1,000 to the 10,000 and negative 10,000 square, and it's showing where spawn is, and it's showing a rough sense of what biomes live where and where the oceans and things are and stuff. And I could make that publicly available as well. And then it becomes just a matter of like, okay, so who wants to do something here? It'd probably be just as well to not get into a heavy, like, let's build a particular thing. It's more like, let's derp around, do something fun, and come up with plans. Like, get several people together, log on for the first time, because it's empty. There's no player accounts there at the moment, so everybody just shows up at spawn with nothing. And I would also like to do it in such a way that there's no mods or anything like that available, other than if I was to log on to the actual server as an admin. But I'm inclined to let it take care of itself rather than worry too much about like making everybody play nice. It's more like, okay, we see what happens. And yeah, it becomes a question of, who feels like doing that, if anybody, and whether I can build it into my schedule or find other people who can because essentially the heart of this idea is I should do something other than work really hard on all this stuff all the time. And should play a video game. Yeah. Oh, David, I thought you said that you probably shouldn't because you got really heavy into other games and stuff and that ate your life. That's possibly, I guess it remains to be seen. I shouldn't look a gift horse in the mouth. But that's where that stands. Like, if I hear from Whitesy and he's ready to go, then I'm good enough with that, because that was the main idea, was that we were going to do that together. If he's not in, then it's a matter of whether I have patrons or fans who would A, like to see that, or B, like to be part of it, and what their schedules look like. So, oh no, actually I wouldn't worry about that because I have Minecraft playing friends who are notoriously destructive. So it wouldn't really be a matter of that. Like, I've got, that friend that I talked about who only wants to talk in TeamSpeak, and she'd probably be available. I've got a friend who's a really fun guy to hang out and talk with. He's a younger sort of millennialish dude, and he's hilariously destructive on Snowball Madness servers. And then I've got another fellow who's kind of like this. I haven't been hanging around with him all that much. He took this sort of alt-righty direction, so some of the things he talks about I'm not happy with. But he remains my friend to the extent that I hang out with him. And that guy is the Minecraft expert, so he's really good at stuff. And he is also capable of like going and... I've had those two doing a almost Laurel and Hardy act at times, because I did a Minecraft streams years ago with these two, and they would get on to the Snowball Madness stream and start using the technologies to make an enormous base or something. Like, okay, this combination of pickaxe with a snowball excavates large amounts of area, so let's excavate area. And then the other fellow would be like, oh, snowball on top of snowball on top of snowballs means it throwing one sends out these effects through lots of other multiple snowballs that multiply upon themselves until it becomes this hilarious thing, and then you put a TNT bomb on top of that, so you drown yourself in a million billion explosions. Because, hey, I'd call it Snowball Madness for a reason. So you'd have the one fellow who's very good at this stuff, building elaborate bases really efficiently with these tools. And then the other fellow mistakenly had a multiplier snowball with like TNT on top of that and accidentally blows it all up in a moment of not paying attention. And they're like, what? What did you do? And it was definitely entertaining, although you don't necessarily want to stand too close to some of these guys when they're dropping things in the wrong place or whatever. But it's past 1, so what I need to do is shift over to my afternoon and have a quick glance at some of this stuff, last observations and questions. Bernie is like, I kind of like disgusting digital noises. Sometimes I do too. Some of the best FM synth noises are from overloading and exaggerating things to the point where it becomes this white noisy grunge and grind, and that's very effective. I have not tested Thrillseeker VBL. Remember, I make stuff myself. I don't usually try other people's things. Transistor face mirror? I'm not sure what a transistor face mirror is. Maybe you mean transformer face mirror? And that is still on the agenda. What I need to be doing is measuring some of these. I have transformers, so what I would be doing is getting some of my hardware stuff, probably the Moog, because I think the Moog will be doing the best square waves and things. Or using it as, using the LFO, for instance, and running high amplitude square waves and control squares through the transformer and then capturing it at 24-bit 192K, and then analyzing that and working out like, okay, here's this tiny transformer. It's miserable at passing bass. What does it look like when that's happening? Because rather than going like, oh, the analysis of this says that the phase is delayed in this, I want to see what the waveform does when the tiny transformer is not adequate at passing stuff. And then when I see what the waveform does, I can figure out how to make the numbers do that in an algorithm, rather than just dividing it down into like, this is the phase and this is the frequency and this is the FFT analysis of the thing. It's like, show me what the wave does. Show me what the output is, because it's not going to look like a square anymore once you've put it through something as weak as that. So I'm going to want to see what the shape of the new wave that I get is, and then it's my problem to figure out how to make an algorithm do that. And if I can do that, I'm on to another good thing. So yeah, transformer effects. Transformer effects is definitely in the, well, I'm already using transformers and some of that stuff, so it's definitely going to find its way into the measurements, and it's going to find its way more into the plugins and things. I do have a couple of things coming up first. I have a release of VST DHIS. That's the same one that I had for AU a while ago. So I have a VST DHIS that is ready to come out, and somebody's asking specifically for that. They were like, I need DHIS yesterday. So that's probably going to be next week. And then there's the idea of the simple, faceless, no control, just interstage capacitance and oscillation removal capacitance, just a plugin that'll do some of the DC filtering, and that you can put after something that's putting out a little DC, and it'll like try to fix it. And people seem to like the idea, and that sounds like such a good utility plugin. Something that is not like capacitor with a really obvious sound, but still does basically the same type of job and will help with some of that stuff. And with extreme simplicity and no added distortion in it at all, just a sort of bandwidth container. And that sounds like such a good idea that I might be fooling around with it for the rest of this week. And that'll be a fairly high priority as well. So yeah. And again, I did mention that I'm going to BronyCon, so if folks want to meet up with me, well, if any of you are actually ponies in secret, then let me know. On that note, it's about time for me to head about my day. And I think what I'll do is I'll explore this doing the non-streaming Minecraft thingy, because the thing about that is if I use ScreenFlow like I use for the plugin videos, I don't have to upload ProRes from that, which I wouldn't be able to because it would be terabytes upon terabytes if I did many hours. But when I actually capture, especially when I'm capturing at 1080p screen size, it's not that cumbersome of a file. Like, I can go for several hours recording in ScreenFlow. It doesn't seem to crash on me. Cross my fingers. Occasionally it has, but usually it doesn't. And I can do like, I don't know, say 5 to 8 gigs of space an hour in capturing something like that. So I could definitely do a Minecraft hangout with people and play on a server, including playing with people who logged on, and capture it to, my hard drive rather than trying to stream it. Take it into ScreenFlow and then output a more normal upload type rather than trying to do ProRes. Just be like, okay, give me an MP4 of this and I'll upload that. And what that would do is give me a file that would also be like 10, 20 gigs in size or so, but the process is exactly what I already do. And when I uploaded that, it would be much higher quality to look at than the extremely garbage quality of if I tried to run a Minecraft client and then also stream like I'm doing now. I've tried that before. It's such a complete disaster that I'm not really interested in attempting it because it's just potato quality. It's like potato quality gaming streaming, and there's no real reason to go there. And as a last thought, ProR, is that a plugin or is that like ProRes? If that's somebody else's plugin, I wouldn't have talked about it because I don't go around using other people's plugins. You want like Whitesea for that? But if ProR is a plugin that some other company makes, I wouldn't know about it because I spend all of my time making my own. So occasionally I'll know stuff like I've used Massive and FM8 and things like that. So I'm happy with those, or I would be if I was still able to use them. But asking my opinion about what you could call the competition, I'm not going to have negative things or positive things to say about it because I'll typically not have ever heard any of it. Anywho, I think let's call it a day. And I will talk to you guys later. So, bye-bye. Catch you later.